Yeah. So let's begin the class today. So do you have any questions? How is your practice and preparation going on?
No, since I don't have time to work on that. This week I need to spend some time.
Oh, right.
Actually, recently I moved out from the company, so a bit busy with my uh, new, KT process and everything.
Oh,
So environment setup, quite busy.
okay, okay, no problem.
Yes, and I just started with the one which you are given, right? The URL.
Yeah, yeah, the questions, yeah.
So, yeah, I just started with that. So it's going on.
Yeah. So if you have any problems with the questions or you have some clarifications, you can just take a screenshot and you ping me on WhatsApp. I'll clarify something. Yeah.
Sure, sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So let us begin class for today, right? So we will start off with auto scaling today, right? So we'll probably will finish auto scaling, right? So we have seen the elastic load balancer, that is the ELB, right? Right. So we saw the ELB can be used to use it for for uh, for high availability, right? So basically, so whether it's a classic or application load balancer, right? So basically, you have your ELB, you're having some instances behind the ELB, right? So what is the advantage it is giving, right? So it is eliminating basically single points of failure, right? So even if one instance goes down or one availability zone has a problem, right, your service or your application is still up and running, right? And if you get a lot more traffic, right, you are able to add more instances, like manually you can add, right? So as your traffic increases, right, or some other metric which is usually it's related to traffic, right? Usually it's related to traffic, or if some instance is having a problem, if this instance has a problem, you replace that with another healthy instance, right? So basically you want to with ELB, what you basically do is you want to maintain some minimum number of instances, right, for your application to work smoothly, to handle the traffic, either it is everyday traffic, right, or it is some special event which you have, like you say, if you take Amazon shopping site, they will have some traffic pattern, right? Every day they know how much traffic they receive on average, and to handle all the traffic they need some number of instances. But on some days when they have sale or something, they might get some more traffic, right? So the traffic is going to either be constant for certain sites or for certain websites, based on certain events or certain things, the traffic might go up. So when events like this happen, it's not only instance failure, right? So when your traffic is going up, right, so automatically the instances CPU utilization, right, those metrics go up. So you can add more instances, right? You can add them manually, and after that event is completed, after the sale is completed, then the traffic is usually going to fall down to the normal levels. So then maybe you can remove the extra instances, right? So you can do those mm, manually, right? But again, real time nobody is going to do these things manually, right? I think we spoke about what is scaling, right? Scaling in, scaling out, right? Scaling up, scaling down, horizontal scaling, vertical scaling, right? So here with ELB, what is auto scaling is, so you have your ELB, whether it is classic or application or the network load balancer, doesn't matter. So here with auto scaling, what is happening is, say you are starting off with two instances, right? So you know that for everyday traffic, two healthy instances are enough for you, right? So how do you make sure that you always have two instances? So let us say our requirement is you want two instances at all times to handle your everyday traffic spread across two availability zones, right? You want two instances at all times, and you want to be protected against one availability zone failure. So how many instances would you actually need? You would need three to achieve both these conditions, right? You need two instances at all time and also be protected against failure of one availability zone failure protection you want. So here now, even if one availability zone goes down, right, so you can put your machines in three different availability zones, A, B and C. So even if one availability zone goes down, right, you still have two healthy instances, right? But if you're not doing automatic, if you're manually scaling, then if this availability zone has a problem, or if this instance has a problem, you have to go and fix it. So while this is having a problem, now you don't meet these conditions anymore until you go and fix the problem, right? For once you have met these conditions, but now again, if another availability zone fails or another instance fails, then you will be left with only one remaining instance, right? So probably you can see when it has fewer instances, you can go and manually maybe add another instance in a different availability zone or something, right? So you can do this, or what you can do is with auto scaling. Yeah, so we will see another condition also. So here it is not just for your everyday traffic. Say now, for example, on some days you get more traffic, right? Maybe you have some event, some sale, right? So you want to add more instances as your traffic is increasing, right? So let us call this time or date, and then you have traffic, right? So maybe during certain times of the day you have more traffic. Like example, if you take a shopping site, right, or a banking site, mostly the transactions will happen during the working hours in a banking website, right? After hours, the traffic might be less, right? Your shopping website, maybe traffic will be higher, uh, maybe towards the evening and the night, and then early mornings the traffic might be low, right? So some pattern they will have, right? So and if Amazon is having a sale, right, if this is their the normal pattern, if there is a sale, then the traffic might be higher, right, for the duration, right? So when something like this is happening, right, so you might need to scale basically, right? You want to scale, right? So we saw what is scale in, what is scale out, right? So you want to scale out, right? To handle a lot more traffic, you need some more machines. Maybe you need 4 or 5 machines. So you can add these machines manually also, right? Okay, tomorrow I'm having a sale. I'm expecting so much traffic. I need more instances to handle the traffic. So you are adding more instances. After the sale is over, right? You remove these machines to come back to the normal to handle normal traffic, right? So you can do this manually, but practically we are not going to do it manually, right? So we use a feature called auto scaling. As the name says, auto scaling. So it can scale. It can both scale in and scale out. That is, it can add instances or it can remove instances. So you have to configure auto scaling. We configure something called auto scaling policies. So here you are going to define. So you are going to say minimum I want 3 instances, maximum I want 3 instances. So in case you just want to maintain capacity, so you don't expect any big traffic surges or something, you're just a small website, right? At all given point of time, you want to have 2 healthy instances, right? You are not worried about scaling, but you just want to maintain this condition, right? So at all given point of time, you want to have minimum 2 instances, and you want to be protected against one availability zone failure. So we know that we need 3 machines in 3 different availability zones to achieve this condition, right? So you can create an auto scaling policies which says min and max is 3. So what this auto scaling will do is it will monitor, it will check, it will continuously keep checking, right? So if something is having a problem, it is going to automatically replace, because if this has a problem, then the number of healthy machines become 2, right? So it sees that okay, somebody has this guy has configured, he's saying minimum is 3, min max is 3, means you're maintaining capacity, you're not actually scaling, you're just maintaining capacity. If the min and max values are the same, you're maintaining capacity, right? So here, okay, one instance has become unhealthy, so we have only 2 now. So it automatically says that we have only 2, but we need minimum 3. So it will add one more machine. So it will try to maintain whatever you have specified, right? So if you min and max values are same, that means you are maintaining capacity. So if you want to do scaling, so now you just don't want to maintain capacity, you also want to scale based on some parameter. So tomorrow you are having a sale, or every day you get more traffic in the evenings compared to the night, right? Or you get more traffic during the business hours, and then in the evening and the night traffic goes down. So maybe 3 machines are enough from say midnight 11 p.m. to morning 6 a.m., right? From around say 8 a.m. your traffic is going to increase, so probably 6:37 you want to start ramping up your instances to handle the traffic. So there you can specify something like, you can say min is 3, max is say 6, something like this. So when you put something like this, it means you're saying you maintain 3 instances at all time, right? That is the minimum, but you can scale up to 6. It will not scale beyond 6. So you can give some condition. You can say if the CPU is going greater than say 50%, or if the traffic which is coming in is greater than some value, then you add some instance, right? Or afterwards, if the CPU goes below 40%, you remove one instance. So we can specify this. We will see how to do this, right? So you can both scale out and scale in. So don't think that scaling is only scaling out, right? So you're saying you can vary between 3 and 6 depending upon some conditions. So minimum, always there will be 3 machines behind the ELB, right? Minimum, it will have 3 machines behind the ELB, something like this, right? So based on some event, suppose you're saying if CPU goes greater than 50%, then add one instance. So then what it will do, it will keep monitoring the CPU. If the average CPU utilization goes greater than 50, it will add another instance. Then you can again, if this continues, then again it will try to add another instance. Then you can say if CPU is less than 40%, then you remove one instance. Then it will remove the instance, but it will not remove, it will try to maintain 3. It will not remove this, because you are saying minimum I want 3, but if some condition applies, then you add more instance or you remove one or more instances. So it will maintain minimum 3. These extra stuff which are going to be added, right? So it will try to maintain the capacity based on the conditions that you are applying. So it can not only scale out, it can be used to scale in also, right? And some people will say it is not scaling, right? Why sometimes it will not scale is, again, it will not go beyond 6, right? So if you say I want 6 is my max, then once it reaches 6 instances, say based some CPU utilization, right, now you have added 6 machines, right? So now even after 6 machines, if your metric, that is you're specifying CPU, is still greater than 50%, it is not going to add the 7th instance, because you said maximum 6, minimum is 3, maximum 6. So it will shuffle between 3 and 6. It will not go less than 3, it will not go more than 6. So you should not say that still my CPU utilization, it's not scaling, right? So if it is not scaling, then you need to increase the max. So it will not go beyond max, and it will try to stay between the min and max. Okay, so that we have to remember.
One question here.
Yeah.
So, respect to this auto scaling, it's automatically increase the instance count based on our configuration, and also decrease.
Yes.
My question is, in case like how it will determine this availability zone? It will automatically taken care by this AWS, or we need to specify something?
I'll show you.
These are the available.
We'll see all that. We'll see all that.
Oh, okay. We have to configure.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see all those options. We're just starting off. It's just introduction. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So another thing to remember is, right, a lot of people don't pay attention to this, right? So auto scaling you can use even without load balancer. Most people use it with load balancer, but auto scaling can be used without a load balancer also. It is not compulsory that you need a load balancer to do auto scaling, right?
Okay.
ELB is not required for auto scaling, but it is used mostly with auto scaling. So you can ask, what is the use of auto
Yes.
scaling without ELB? Say you are using some other product, right? You are not using AWS ELB. You are using your own some third-party software or something, which needs some instances. Or
Right.
without ELB, you are doing some. We saw Route 53, right? Simple routing policies or
Yes.
weighted routing policies where you can give multiple values, right? Or some case where you don't use a ELB, but you want to maintain some number of instances, right? So auto scaling is, we call it as a auto scaling group. Okay, so they are a group of instances that are managed by auto scaling, right? So in auto scaling it is called auto scaling group. Auto scaling group is simply put a group of instances which is auto scaling managed by auto scaling based on the policies that you specify. These instances can be attached to a load balancer or they can exist as instances. You can use these with other services that you do. Suppose you are using HA proxy, right? A third party load balancer, Nginx, right? Or something like that, right? You are using your own or a third party solution for different products, right? And you want to maintain that capacity, right? You can do that. It does not have to be used only with ELB, right? Your auto scaling is going to basically manage the instances, not the ELB. It will not replace your ELB, right? Auto scaling only manages the instances. Your instances can either be attached to ELB or they can be just independent instances which can work with other services or other products that you use, right? So probably first we will see auto scaling without ELB, right? But it is possible, right? So don't think that auto scaling is possible only with ELB. But mostly people use it with the ELB. But if you are putting your own service or a product or something like that which needs to maintain some capacity of machines, you can do that, right? So we will open auto scaling. It is under EC2 only, right? So I'll open auto scaling and another thing called the launch configurations. We will see uh, what is that, right? Okay. So we will go here. So here you see at present I don't have any instances, right? So at present I don't have any instances. And here I have opened the, what happens? This is auto scaling. This is, oh, have they disabled launch configuration or what? Okay. Okay, so again they're updating this console. In case you're following any other course or online videos, the console might look different, but more or less it is same. The options have shifted here and there, right, for a lot of services these days, right? So we'll talk about this now. Yeah, auto scaling now, without ELB, right? So we don't have a load balancer. So let me open that also and keep, right? So yeah, so we don't have any load balancer, we don't have any instances, right? So basically auto scaling, right, it can scale based on capacity, based on health checks. We have different things, right? So how is it going to scale, when is it going to scale, right? So it can scale based on the capacity which you have specified. It can scale based on the health checks. Like I said, if this instance becomes unhealthy, right, it can scale based on capacity. It can based on health checks or based on the scaling policies that you specify, right? It is not just based on these conditions, right? So again, if your instance is unhealthy, right, so it can scale based on those things. So we will quickly see how it works without a load balancer, right? So here you see I don't have any instances, right? So now the next question is, how does it know which instance to launch? So you have launched three machines behind your load balancer, right? So how does it know when there is a problem which machine to launch? What is the configuration, right? It cannot simply launch randomly some machine, right? Suppose say you have an application, right, like what we saw, right? You have your EC2 instance on which you have Apache, right, and then you have deployed your application, right? You are attaching it to the ELB, right? So if this machine has a problem, how does it know which machine to replace? Because you want the same thing to come, right? It cannot launch some random machine, right? It has to have all this stuff already installed. So how is it going to know which machine to launch, what instance type to launch, which availability zone to launch, what security group to use, right? So in order to use auto scaling, you need to use it along with something called launch configuration or launch template. Both are more or less the same, right? Launch configuration is a slightly older one. Launch template is a newer type. So what is this launch configuration or launch template? Right? So basically it's a template or a configuration. So when you launch a EC2 instance, what do you specify? Right? We saw how to launch EC2 instance. So when launching an instance, what do you specify? Right? You specify the instance type, availability zone, security group, right? IP address, all these stuff you specify, right? You specify the key, right? Any script you want to put, right? All these you specify by launching an instance, and then the final step is going to be launch instance. So launch configuration or launch template is also the same thing, but you don't launch the instance. You save all this as a configuration, right? Launch configuration or launch template is you define all these parameters and then you save it as a template or a configuration. And then when you're creating an auto scaling group, you attach a launch configuration or a launch template to that. So auto scaling knows what to launch, right? It by itself, it does not know. We have to configure, right? So it is combined with a launch configuration or a launch template. So if you have three instances, if some instance has a problem, it has to replace with the same instance. It should not just put some random instance, right? So you can specify the AMI, the instance type, the availability zone, security group, all that stuff. You specify it in a launch configuration or a launch template and save it. And when you're creating an auto scaling group, you specify the first step is going to be which launch configuration to use or which launch template to use, right? The difference between launch configuration and launch template is launch template, basically you can't, what do you say, you can't edit your launch configuration or launch template. Both you can't edit. In the exam you get this question, you can't modify them. But with launch template, what you can do is you can create different versions, right? Suppose you created a configuration and you saved it as a launch template. So maybe it is your initial version. Suppose you want to change something, you want to modify something, you can't edit this version 1, right? But the same launch template, right, you can create version 2, right? So technically you can't edit version 1, you can only have version 2. Launch configuration, you don't have any versioning. So if you have created a configuration and you have saved it as a launch configuration, then you can't edit it. You have to create a new launch configuration. Whereas here, launch template, you can have different versions and you can call different versions. And launch templates can be used with EC2 instances also. So here, if you see, when you go to launch instance, you will see an option that says launch from template. Template means you have basically defined all the values. So launch templates you will see under instances, and launch configuration you will see under auto scaling, right? Both are more or less same, but launch templates have a feature of adding the versioning, and they can also be used for just launching instances, whereas launch configuration is used only with auto scaling group, right? So launch template is basically you are simplifying instance launches by already specifying some values, right? Launch template version, right? You can specify the version, right? And then all this is basically while launching the instance, whatever is there, those values you are giving, right? But you are not creating an instance. You are just saving that as a configuration, right? Or a template. Both are more or less the same. The main difference being you can't edit either of them, but with launch templates, you can have multiple versions for the same template. Whereas with launch configuration, there is no concept of templates, right? You have to remove and create. So here you see I already have a launch configuration. So let me remove that. We will start with fresh one. So here if you see, you cannot edit, right? If you don't like this configuration, you remove and you create a new one, right? So let me remove this launch configuration, and auto scaling also we don't have anything. Okay, auto scaling also we don't have anything. Okay, so and we don't have any load balancers. So now without load balancers, we will try to create a group of instances. So manually I'm not going to do. So I'm going to go to auto scaling and say create a auto scaling group, right? So I'm going to do auto scaling, right? Without load balancer, no ELB. That is, I just want to maintain a group of instances. These instances you can use anywhere you want, right? Your own, what do you say, a third party product or service behind which you want to maintain some number of instances, you can do it, right? Without ELB, right? So you want to maintain group of instances. So I'll say, for example, I want to maintain 2 instances, right? I have some application that I have hosted, right? Whatever I want to maintain 2 instances. So how do you do that? So you go here, you give auto scaling a name for your auto scaling group, right? I will just say auto scaling EC2, right? And then you have to specify the launch template or launch configuration. Because we don't have anything, it is not showing anything. If you want to switch to launch configuration, you switch to that. Basically both more or less are the same, right? So how do you do that, right? We don't have any launch configuration, so you can say create launch configuration. If you already had, it will show up. Just because I removed it now, it doesn't show anything. So I will say create launch configuration, right? So here is your launch con. So AWS, they recommend you can use launch templates, right? So again, that is up to you. The steps are more or less the same, right? So here I will just call this launch configuration demo or something, demo with EC2, some name you can give, right? So in this launch configuration, you are going to specify which AMI to use, right? So which AMI I'm going to use, I'll try to use some Amazon Linux AMI, right? So here I'm just going to pick up the AMI ID, right? I'm going to pick up. So if you have your own AMI, obviously you will be specifying that, right? So I'm not launching an instance. I just went to pick up that AMI name, right? So I'm going to put that AMI, okay? And I can choose the instance type. So say I want T2 micro, okay? Or T3 micro, whatever you want, you can choose, right? So this step is like creating an instance, but you're not creating, you're just going to save it as a configuration, right? So here I'm going to give my instance permission to S3, right? So we will see this in IAM, which is going to be the next topic today, right? So basically I'm giving it access to S3 so that I can, I'm going to put a script, a startup script, right? So that I can actually, what do you say, to download my code which is located in S3, right? So if you remember for the load balancer class and all that stuff, right? We use that, right? So we will put a startup script which is going to download my application, install Apache and deploy it. We will do that, right? And then you have all these other stuff, right? While creating an instance, enable detailed monitoring, ABS optimized instance, right? Storage volumes, security groups, all this stuff. So we will just configure the basic required stuff, right? So here, for example, I'm going to put some user data, right, which is basically my startup script, right? So it is going to install Apache, copy my content, start the service, right? And again, if you want your instances to have a public IP or no, those things you can configure, right? So I will just put assign public IP, for instance, if you want to log in, right, straight away from outside, those kind of things, right? It's just like launching your instance, right? And remember here again, here also they have specified, right, existing launch configurations cannot be edited, because sometimes you get this question in the exam, right? So storage, all these things you can modify, right? Security group, right? So I'm just going to create a new security group, and I'm going to add a rule for HTTP traffic. Where is HTTP? Okay, whatever, port 80, right? I'm going to say allow traffic from anywhere. Okay, right? Right, and then you can specify a key pair, right? And then you are not actually launching the instance, you are just saving this as a configuration. I'm saying create launch configuration. So now it has saved as a configuration, it has not launched any instance, right? So let me close this. So we have created our launch configuration. So now here, if I go and refresh, I should be able to see that over here, right, with the things that I have specified, right? So now I go to the next step. Here is where you specify the VPC. Where do you want to launch your instances, right? Your VPC and the availability zones are the subnets indirectly, right? So we want to launch it in this VPC, right? We are creating auto scaling group that is going to work with this VPC and these subnets. So here you can add as many or as few as subnets as you want. So if you add just one subnet and you say I want min maxes, so according to our plan we wanted 2 instances, right? So we don't want to scale, let us say I just want 2 instances. So in the next step you will be configuring the min and max, right? So we will put something like 2 and 2, right? But here these 2 instances, where are they going to launch? Okay, we have specified the VPC, maybe it's the dev VPC. So which availability zone or which subnets they need to be launched, so that you can specify, right? So if you choose only 1A, then both the machines will be in 1A. If you choose 1A and 1B, then it will try to place the instances as evenly as possible, to distribute the instances as evenly as possible, right? If you say 1A, 1B, 1C, and you put only 2, it can be in any one of these. So it will not put both the machines in 1C, right? It will try to use as many different availability zones as possible from the list that you have specified. Suppose if I'm trying to maintain 6 machines, right, and you put A, B, C, then it will try to put 2 machines in each availability zone. If you say A, B, C, D, then probably it will put 1, 2, 3, 4, then it will put something like this, right? It will try to maintain something like this, right? It will try to maintain a even balance across the availability zones that you have specified. If you put only 2 availability zones for 6 machines, then it will try to spread it like 3 in one availability zone, 3 in another availability zone, right? So ideally you want to use multiple availability zone, but it is not compulsory, right? So architecture best practice states that use multiple availability zones. So I will say I want 1A and 1F, right? Or 1A, 1F and 1E. I want to maintain 2 instances, but 3 availability zones I'm going to put, right? And then I'm going to say next step, right? So here you see load balancing is not enabled by default. So you can use auto scaling without load balancing also, but mostly people use it with load balancing. We are not going to use with load balancing, right? We just want to maintain. We are using our own third-party product or service, which needs some number of instances, right? And then here you have health checks, right? So health checks are what? It is going to basically check whether the instance or the instances behind the ELB are healthy or not, right? So because we are not using ELB, right? So you don't have to worry about this ELB now. So when we talk about ELB, then we will configure the ELB health checks, right? So for now, it is going to follow the instance EC2 health checks, that is the status checks, right? So based on those things, but you can add additional metrics also, right? You can add additional metrics also, right? And one thing you have to remember is what is this health check grace period, right? So what is auto scaling going to do? It needs to what do you say, to know the health of these machines, right? Are these machines healthy or not, right? Is it healthy or not, right? So what is this grace period is, so when you create instances or when instances are being added, right? So when you create a EC2 instance, what happens? It takes a couple of minutes for the instance to come up and running, right? While the instance is being created, if you do a health check, it is going to fail, obviously, because if I just say create instance, right, the status checks wouldn't have passed, right? So whenever you launch an instance, it takes a minute or two depending upon what startup scripts you have, what type of machine it is, right? So it will take a minute or two usually, right? So what is this health check grace period is? It is basically specifying, right, the amount of time to wait until the health checks are performed, right? So immediately you don't want to start doing health checks because they might fail because the instance was just created. So you probably want to give it a minute or two. I'm just going to give it 2 minutes grace period. That is, once an instance is launched, for the first 2 minutes, you don't check anything. Just wait. The instance is going to, I mean, because we put some script or something, right? It has to update, install HTTPD, start the service, right? To do the startup thing or, right? So it is going to take a minute or two. So the health check grace period is the amount of time until auto scaling performs the first health checks on new instances after they are put into service. Basically, you're saying immediately don't check the health, just wait for 2 minutes. It's same like nowadays you have COVID, right? So immediately they're not doing the check. They are saying you wait for a few days. If you have symptom, only then we will check. All right. So same thing here, right? Okay. So you go to the next step here. You specify the group. So what is auto scaling? It's basically a group of instances that you manage, right? So you can set the min, max, and the desired capacity. What is the desired capacity? People get confused. I'll just try to explain it, right? So the min capacity is how much you want minimum at all given point of times. According to our requirement, it is 2. Maximum is 2. So because I want to maintain 2, if you want to scale, then you increase the maximum like 3, 4, or 400, whatever you want, right? Then what is this desired capacity, right? So the value for this will be between min and max. That is the first thing. You can't put this to 0, right? It will give error. When I try to click next step, it will give error, right? So the desired capacity should be between min and max. So what is this desired capacity, right? Again, when I show you by example, it will be probably more clear, right? You have min, max. Say in this case, I'm saying 2, and then you have the desired capacity. What is this value? So say that you, because we have said min, max 2, auto scaling is going to launch 2 machines. Okay, now everything is fine, right? So when you do this, you will see the value for this will be 2, right? Suppose say one instance goes unhealthy, then also this value will be 2. What auto scaling will do is it will try to achieve this capacity. It tries to achieve this capacity. This will probably be clear if I change the max value to 6. I'm saying min to max 6. Max 6 is, I will put some condition. I will say if CPU goes greater than 50%, add one instance or add two instances, something like this. Okay. So it starts off with two machines, right? So if the CPU, now we'll assume now the CPU is less than 50. So how many machines will be there? Two machines will be there. The desired capacity will say 2. That means autoscale is saying I need 2 machines. So it will try to achieve this. How it will achieve this? It will launch 2 machines. Okay, now 2 machines are there. So the desired capacity will be 2 as long as the CPU is less than 50. Now if the CPU goes greater than 50, then what happens? It needs to, no, we'll assume that it needs to add one instance, right? So now let us say CPU goes greater than 50. So what will happen is this value will change to 3. You have only 2 instances. Now because some condition is met, now this will say I need 3. Now auto scaling will try to achieve this capacity. So what it will do? It will
So,
add
so
one
Siddharth,
instance. Yeah.
so desired capacity changes automatically
Yes.
based on.
Yes. That's what I'm saying. So if some condition is met, this value will change automatically, right?
So only we could specify is min and max, right?
Yes. Even though
Desired capacity we can
yes,
specify.
even though they say you have to specify, I don't understand why they put it here. Because of this, a lot of people get confused. Earlier it was not there. Now they have added this. But again, if you see, this value will be between min and max. It cannot be more than that or less than that, right? So
Okay.
say if the CPU goes below 50 now, then what it will say? It needs to remove one instance. Let us say you have a policy that says if CPU goes less than 50, remove one instance. Then now if the CPU goes below 50, what will happen? This value will change to 2. Then it will try to achieve this value 2. How can it achieve this value 2? By removing one instance, right? So this value keeps changing automatically based on the conditions that you have specified, and auto scaling tries to achieve this capacity. That is what
So
it is
in the
basically.
exam, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So in the exam, if they ask if the same condition, same scenario, like min is 2, max is 6. Okay. So
Yeah.
if they ask what could be desired capacity, means we can mention 2, correct?
Yeah, it depends upon the condition, but in exam, I don't think they ask these type of questions in the architect. But practical purpose, you have to know what is this desired, right?
I think it's kind of starting value, initial value, like
You can say, but
sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, it is not, because the initial value is going to be minimum. So even if you put the
Oh.
desired as 1, right, it will
Hmm.
launch 2 machines because the minimum is 2. Because there people
So
have
But
yeah, basically then it will be min and desired should be same. It should safer side, right? Min and desired.
ideally, right? So we will see, we'll create and see, we'll see that,
okay.
right? So
In case if I mention like decide is 3 and min is 2, and when you start, it will launch a 3 machine
yes, it will try
like
to
that. This
launch
one.
3.
Yeah. Okay. 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 Okay.
But again, so because a lot of people, they use these conditions, right? They
Yeah.
specify conditions for scaling. So mostly it will depend on that, right?
Correct.
So earlier it was a little bit more clearer. Now with this new console, they have what do you say? They have made it a little confusing, right? Right. Yeah. We'll come back to this, right? So mostly people use it is dynamically what do you say, going to change usually, right? But I don't know, some cases where people might use like fixed thing, right? But usually that's what is the desired capacity. That's the behavior that I have noticed, right? So yeah. Yeah. So again, the desired capacity, you can't put whatever you want. It has to be between min and max, right? It can't be more than that. You can't say min is 2, max is 6, and the desired is 7, right? So those type of things. Okay. So yeah. So the next thing is you have scaling policies. So probably the scaling policies we will see with the load balancer, right? So there it will be a bit more clearer, right? So for now we will just leave it without what do you say? We'll just try to maintain the capacity. We'll not try to use any scaling policy or any such thing for now, right? Okay, so we will go what happened between min and max, sorry, 2, right? Yeah, so here if you want you can add some notification. We will see this when we come to SNS. So basically if it fails to launch, or it launches, or it fails to terminate, you want to get a notification, an email or something. If you want you can add a notification. It's like your billing alert, right? Whenever your cost goes more than something, you get a notification. Same thing here. Whenever a machine is launched, or a machine is terminated, or it fails to launch, or it fails to terminate, you can receive a notification. We are not going to do that, right? And then if you want you can add tags for your instances and whatever is being created, right? And you're saying next, and you're saying create auto scaling group, right? So here you see I don't have any instances, right? I'm saying create auto scaling group, right? Now what does it say? The desired capacity is 2, right? Now, so it tries to achieve that. So here you see it will launch 2 machines, right? I didn't launch manually. So what are the availability zones which I specified over here, right? We specified I think A, E and B, right? So 3 availability zones we specified, right? So A, E and F, right? We said A, E and F. So it will use 2 out of these 3 availability zones. So it used A and E, right? So it has launched these instances. I didn't do anything manually. I just created this configuration. It launched my instances, right? And it should have installed Apache and deployed my application. So I can quickly just take this IP and see whether it has completed doing that. Probably it is going to take a minute or 2, right? So because of these reasons, you want to give it some health check grace period. Immediately you don't want to check its health. Suppose you have a very short health check grace period, right? And you also have something called cooldown period. If those values are not proper, then you will see a flip-flop. That is, an instance will launch, it will terminate, again it will launch, again it will terminate, again it will launch. So it will not be stable if your value, if those health check values and cooldown values are low, because you want to wait until the instance actually becomes healthy. Because as soon as you launch instance and it fails the health check, then again it will try to do another scaling, right? Now you see it took a minute or so. Now my application is up and running on the instance, right? Okay, so now here you see it has launched 2 instances, right? And here you have certain other values, right? So here you can go and edit your auto scaling group, but you can't edit your launch configuration, right? So this auto scaling group configuration, right? The desired capacity, min capacity, maximum capacity, these things you can edit, right? Launch configuration you can't edit. Even though it says edit, you just replace it with a different launch configuration. You don't edit a launch configuration, okay? So if you don't want this launch configuration, you can use another launch configuration, but that launch configuration you can't edit, right? If you don't like this, you create one more and you attach that to this auto scaling group, right? So we are not using a load balancer. So again, this new console, I have to scroll a lot, right? So here you see, right? So the health checks that you have specified, the grace period, and you also have this value called default cooldown. What is this default cooldown is basically after a scaling activity has happened, how many seconds to wait prior to doing another scaling activity. Now say for example, I have created a scaling activity based on CPU. So it has added 1 instance. So let us say our min and max is 2 and 6, saying if CPU goes greater than 50, add 1 instance. So it added 1 instance. So now what you're saying, now one scaling activity has happened. So what is the cooldown period is, you're saying for 300 seconds, don't do another scaling activity. right? Otherwise, what will happen is if these values, that is, I told you the health check and the cooldown period, if these values are too low usually or too high, then the scaling might happen too fast or too slow. Especially if these values are too low, what will happen is if you specify health check period is less and cooldown period is less, then it might keep adding an instance, removing it, again adding, again removing, again adding, again removing, right? So you want to add an instance and give it some time to become stable, right? So those values you have to be careful. That is going to vary depending upon your use case, but usually the health check grace period is around 100 to 120 seconds unless you have a long startup process or your services take longer time to start up, right? Cooldown period is also, you can say like 120 seconds or something like that, right? So the higher the value, probably the slower it will be, but probably more stable it will be, right? So cooldown period, maybe I will say is also say 120 seconds, or maybe, yeah, right? I'm going to say update, right? Right, so you have this setting, right? Now you see it saying the desired capacity is 2, min max is 2. So if I want to edit, now I want to say the min is minimum is 3, maximum is 3, and I say update, right? So again, the desired capacity has to be between those two, right? I can modify these type of things, right? Now say if I go and create a problem, now let us say I terminate this instance, right? I go and say terminate my instance. Now what will happen, right? Now here if you see the desired capacity is 2. So again it is not instantly going to go and scale. So again it is going to check the health, right? So if you go to the activity thing, you will see what is happening, right? If I go to this activity history, right? So here you see it launched 2 machines, right? It is increasing the capacity from 0 to 2, right? Right? User created auto scaling group, changing the desired capacity from 0 to 2. Because the desired capacity was 2, it needed to launch 2 machines. So it has launched those 2 machines. Now we have created a problem. So now in a minute or so, you will see it's already here. So it's saying terminating machine, right? An instance was taken out of service in response to a health check, indicating it has been terminated or stopped. So it has identified that there was a problem because the instance was stopped, right? Now you see it has launched another instance because the desired capacity is 2. It tries to maintain. Here a few seconds ago, here the instance would have been 1, right? Here it would have shown as 1 because the desired capacity is 2. It tries to match this. This becomes 2. Now you see it has launched another instance. Which availability zone? It has used A again. It is not using E again, right? So it has launched another instance over here, right? And it will be the same configuration. Now this instance which has launched, if I open, I should still be able to see my same application, right? Again it is going to take a minute or so to come back up, right, for the script to run and the application to be deployed, right? Right, so here if you see in the activity, it is saying instance was started in response to a difference between the desired and the actual capacity, right? So it will try to achieve this. The actual capacity is this, right? Actual capacity is at present how many machines are there. So if there is a difference between these two, it tries to update the actual capacity with the desired capacity, right? That's what basically is trying to do, right? So here my service, you see it is the same machine, right? This new machine which has launched, it has the same T3 T2 micro, same AMI, same key, same application, everything is deployed. So how does it know which one to do? It's based on the launch configuration that this auto scaling group is using, right?
So yeah, since we mentioned maximum as 3, so automatically now one is in place, right?
No, no,
Even though one is still terminated.
it is minimum. We are still minimum. We are not going to maximum. Still, it is having only 2,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, the one who got terminated, right, before?
Sorry, I didn't get you.
No, no, which is terminated by not by
Yeah,
system.
yeah, that's correct. That's correct. Yeah, I understand. Since it got terminated, so again one more got added, right?
Yes, because it
Yes.
needs to maintain 2.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, I
Yeah,
got it.
because you terminated, it added. So if you say based on if CPU goes greater than something, add one instance, then it will add based on some condition. But here, because
Yeah,
we are not doing anything, it is just purely based on the health of the machines. We are not simulating any load or something. We will see that with the load balancer, right? There it will be a little more clear. But here also you can add the rules for scaling up or scaling down, those type of things. So either you manually terminate the machine, or if it has some problem, health checks fail, right? Different metrics you can do. And another thing is, after you finish practicing auto scaling, don't go and terminate the machines and log out. Some people do that. It happens because what will happen? Say you finish practicing now, I terminate these machines. Then what will happen? Right? I terminate the machine, I log out. Right? So what will happen after a minute? It will again launch 2 machines because auto scaling is there. You will think that you cleaned up your machines. Right? I terminated one machine, it replaced one more machine. Now say I finished practicing, I want to clean up, I will say terminate both these machines. Then what will happen? It will launch 2 more machines again. You don't have to
Yes.
be logged into AWS, so you have to be careful when you're working with auto scaling. Make sure you remove the auto scaling group. So if I remove the auto scaling group, it removes all the instances created in the group, because these instances are managed by auto scaling. You can manually stop, terminate, do those things, but it might result in another instance being created. So if I stop this instance, because it is being monitored by auto scaling, it will launch one more instance. So whether you stop or terminate, right? So don't do it over here manually. Make sure you delete the auto scaling, because if you delete there also, no, it doesn't matter, because auto scaling will immediately trigger 2 more instances or 1 more instances, whatever it is. So please delete the auto scaling group after you have finished practicing. So when you remove the auto scaling group, all the instances managed by that will be removed. Now here if you see, both these machines will be terminated in a minute or 2. Right? So be careful with this while practicing. Right? So we'll just wait for a minute for this to clean up. Then we will go with the load balancer. Right here you see it's still saying 2. What is the desired capacity? 0. So it will make it 0 and it will go off. Right here you see it has started terminating the machine. Yeah. So here you see it has terminated the machine. Your auto scaling group also would have been removed. Right? It has matched the instances. Now it is removing the group. Right? There were 2 instances. It reached the desired capacity 0. Now it is removing the auto scaling group also. Right? So auto scaling group is also been removed. Our launch configuration will be there. So remember, there is no additional cost for using launch configuration or auto scaling. There is no extra cost for launch configuration. You just pay for the instances or the load balancers. Okay, there is no separate cost for using auto scaling or launch configuration. It is always free, because it is just a configuration or a template that you're specifying, right? You're not actually creating any resource, right? So if auto scaling creates instances, then you pay the instance the normal pricing. There is no extra price for using this feature. Okay, It's probably another thing you want to keep in mind, right? Just for practical point of, right? So there is no cost for this launch configuration or auto scaling, right? The same launch configuration can be used with multiple auto scaling groups also. You don't need, it doesn't have to be that, it can be used only with what do you say, with one auto scaling group, right? So it is a configuration, you use it with a different auto scaling group also. Okay, so we'll take a small break and then we'll continue with auto scaling with uh, ELB, right?
Okay.
Okay, so we'll catch up at 9:25, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so let us continue, right? So now we will see auto scaling with a load balancer. Again, we have classic and application load balancer. So probably first we'll see with classic, then we'll see with application uh, load balancer. Okay. So for this, obviously we need a load balancer, and then we are going to have some instances behind the load balancer. These instances are going to be managed by auto scaling. That is auto scaling group. The instances are going to be managed by auto scaling. I'm not going to manually manage those instances. So here you see we don't have any instances now, right? Everything is terminated. So we will go ahead, we will create our load balancer. So load balancer you have to create, load balancer auto scaling will not create. Okay, so I'll just call this demo ELB, right? And then we will add the subnets that we want to use with our ELB, that is the different availability. So I'm just going to add everything. And here it is going to accept traffic from on port 80 from anywhere, no problem. Configure health checks, same thing. So I'll just keep these values lower, right? So I'm not going to add any instances, right? Over here, just creating a empty load balancer, right? Our load balancer has been created. There are no instances attached to this ELB, and we don't have any instances over here also, right? We will use the same launch configuration, right, with the load balancer. So here again you go and say create auto scaling group, right? Because we all yeah, so we'll just call it auto scaling group ELB or CLB, whatever we want, right? So you can choose the same launch template, or if you want a different launch template or launch configuration, you can use it, right? So we are going to use the previous launch configuration that we used. So it is going to launch instance using this AMI T2 micro security group, all the startup script, all that already we have saved as a template or a configuration, right? So same thing here, which VPC do you want to use, and what are the subnets that you want to use. So say I want to use C, D, and F, right, or B, C, D, F, right? So my instances will launch only in these four subnets, or indirectly only these availability zones, right? So it will not use A and E, right? Even though your load balancer is using is configured to use all availability zones, the instances which auto scaling will launch will be only in any of these four subnets, or indirectly these availability zones, right? So the steps are more or less the same. So here you choose enable load balancing, right? So if you're using application or the network load balancing, you specify this. Classic means you specify this. So classic, we know the architecture. It is just the instances connected straight away to the load balancer. So you choose the load balancer. It will show your load balancer over here, or here you can say create. Again, it will do the same thing. You can create from here. It will open the load balancer console and create. We have already created, so I'm specifying that ELB. So now here I can use the ELB health checks. Because we are using an ELB, it is recommended to use the ELB health check, right? So ELB health check is, if the ELB it determines that the instance is unhealthy, then it is going to replace it. Auto scaling is going to replace it. Again, same health check grace period. I'll just put it as 120 seconds, right? Next, and here again you have the group size. So maybe here we will try to do you see some scaling, right? So maybe I will say the minimum capacity is 2, maximum capacity is 4, let us say, and the desired capacity will start off with 2. Okay, and then here you have the scaling policies, right? So you have you basically have 3 types of scaling policy, even though here it shows only one. I'll show you where you can see the other things. So basically you have something called target tracking or step scaling policies or simple scaling policies. Simple scaling policies are usually not recommended to be used. It is the older what do you say, a legacy type of option. But again, if it works for you, fine, you can use it. It is not that you should not use, right? So what is target tracking is basically, so here for example, if you see target tracking policy, you're saying, and some metric you have to choose, right, based on what it has to scale, right? So say I can use CPU average network in, right, how many requests I'm getting, those type of things. So here you say I'm using average CPU and I'm giving average CPU is 50%, right? I'm giving 50%. So what this target tracking policy is doing is, right, it keeps tracking this target value, right? So target tracking, I'm giving a target of 50% CPU. So it keeps tracking this value. So if the average CPU goes greater than 50, it will scale up. If it goes below 50, it will scale down. How many it will add, how many it will remove, that it decides. So it is tracking this. So it will try to stay within these limits, right? Basically target tracking is doing that. You are not adding 1 instance or 2 instance. You are saying min is 2, max is 4. So what? And you're saying it is based on CPU utilization, 50%. So if the average CPU utilization goes more than 50, then maybe it will add 1 instance. If the average is say 80 or 100%, maybe it might add 2 machines. That is, it is basically trying to stay within these values automatically, right? So it is doing some work for you. You don't have to decide, do I want to add or do I want to remove. So it will both add and remove by default. So this is not target tracking by default. Is not just adding machines. It will also remove. If the CPU comes below 50, that is if the average value is below this, then it will, if required, it will try to remove the machines. But always it will try to maintain whatever the min and max that you specified. It will not go below this or it will not go above this. It will automatically try to maintain between these two. So for some people, target tracking might be pretty enough. They might not need to do additional things, right? So this is target tracking. So we'll create and then we will go and see the other things, right? Right. And what is the scale in protection? Again, if you don't want to scale in, right, for newly launched instances, then you can protect it from scale in. You only want to scale out, right? You want to protect new instances, because sometimes I told you this flip-flop might happen, right? So in those cases, again, this option you can enable, right? So this, again, you will see a lot of options, right? So each has some meaning, right? So I'm just talking about the most commonly used ones. But again, if you want to go in depth, very in depth, then you can just see what this option means, right? So based on what I am explaining, right, these other options you will be able to understand by just searching in Google. So what is this, right? So like this, you will see a lot of small options here and there. So if you want to know what it is specifically, then we will see. But I'm showing you the most commonly used things, either from exam or from practical point of view, right? Right. So again, you can add the notifications, right? Tags, and you create, right, the launch configuration, what you have specified. The min is 2, max is 4, and we are using the target tracking scaling policy, right? And then let me create the auto scaling. So now what will happen? Here you see the min is 2, max is 4, the desired capacity is 2, right? The current is 0, so it is updating. So it will add 2 machines now. Here you see it is adding 2 machines now. So here if you go and see, it will create 2 machines, right? And it will automatically add it to the load balancer. I am not adding it manually, right? It will create the machines, and you will see the machines here in a minute or so. So let me go down here and edit the so here you can see the activity, whatever is happening, just like the similar one, right? So let me go over here and here 1 minute. So I just want to reduce the cooldown to 120. Let us, right. So here if you see by now, it should have added the instances. Why is it saying out of service? Because again, the load balancer's health checks it has to pass, right? So probably now it will be in service in another few seconds, right? So if that cooldown period, health check, grace period, if they are very low, then uh, even before these health checks can pass, it will say unhealthy, and then again it will try to uh, add instances, right? So that mostly in the DevOps exam you will get that type of question, right? So if you notice a flip-flop, the instance capacities is not stable, it is randomly increasing, decreasing, right? So what to do? Right here you see now one machine is in service, the other one is still saying out of service. So probably another few seconds it should be up and running, right? Provided our configuration was correct, right? So here you go, still it's saying the desired capacity is 2, the current instances are 2, and if we look at the scaling activity, just launch 2 machines. Right here you see now both my machines are in service. If you want, you can just check if your application is working by opening the load balancer, or if you have your DNS name, you can add it over there, right? So our application is working now, right? Behind the ELB now, auto scaling also is working, right? So it has created the machines, added it to the ELB, right? So any questions over here so far? Okay. So now again, say for example, I create some problem. Say I terminate this instance. Then what will happen? Right. So once I terminate this instance, again auto scaling is going to see that the desired capacity is 2, the current capacity is 1. So it will try to replace the instance. Again, it is going to take a few seconds for it to react. Right. It's going to take a few seconds for it to react. So we'll just wait for that to happen. Right. So here you see now there is only one instance running. So auto scaling should detect that any moment now. Right. So here you see it has detected that instance was taken out of service. Right. So here if you see load balancer also, the instance will obviously not be there, it is gone. Right. It terminated the machine, right? Now here you see number of instances is 1, the desired capacity is 2, so it is updating to make this 2, right? Now here you see it has made it 2, means here it should have launched another instance, right? Here you see it has launched another instance in C. That is basically whatever availability zones we have specified, B, C, and right, we have specified these availability zones, right? So again, once it creates this instance, it will automatically go into the load balancer, right? And again, the load balancer's health check it has to pass. Only then it will come into service. Again, it might take a minute or so, right? So now it is saying I don't have anything more to do. The desired is to, there is no other activity. Everything seems to be okay. So I don't need to do any scaling, and it is continuously monitoring to see whether there is any issues or no issues, right? So here you see it has successfully launched a instance, right, in response to a difference between the desired and the actual capacity. Sorry. Okay. Right. Okay. So now here, apart from this, we have given some scaling policy, right? We have given some scaling policy. We are saying minimum is 2, maximum is 2. So now, because the CPU utilization is low, it just reacted to the instance failure by maintaining the minimum capacity, right? Now what happens for scaling, right? So how is the scaling going to happen now, right? So here for scaling, we have the target tracking policy. We said to do it based on the target tracking, that is execute this policy as required to maintain the CPU at 50%, right? So it will, as required, it is going to add or remove, right? So we will see whether it is going to do that or no. Let us see whether it is going to do that or no. So how can I do that? Now I can't simulate a lot of traffic or something, but I can maybe simulate CPU utilization. Traffic also you can simulate if you want. There are different tools to do the load testing. If you want to simulate traffic, you can use this tool called Bees with Machine Gun or Apache Bench. These are tools with which you can simulate load on your application servers, right? Like a load test, number of requests, hundreds of requests, right, to see how it is responding, right? So you have a lot of tools to do this, right? So if you want to simulate traffic, you can use this, or you can use Apache Bench. Actually, Beast with Machine Guns also uses Apache Bench in the background, right? So you can use this to stress test, that is to do some type of load testing, right? Or if you want to simulate CPU usage, you can install stress, right? You can say stress Linux, right? It will show you, right? I'll show you, right, how to add load on a CPU, right? So you want to simulate these things, right, while practicing, you can do that. So let me log into this instance. Right, why is it not logging in? Inbound. Okay, we didn't open port 80. I think I chose the wrong security group. Okay, inbound SSH is not there, so we'll quickly go and we will edit the security group. Simple. Right. I want to allow SSH. Okay, so we'll go back here. Okay, so now I am on this instance. Which instance is this? 254. Right, so we'll call this instance 1 or instance 2, something like that. Okay. So I'll go and install the utility called stress. Okay. No package stress available. This is on Amazon Linux 2. Okay, let me check the packages. Because another thing is they have stopped support for Amazon Linux 1. In case you people use that, you want to update yourself that it has been removed. I think on Amazon Linux 2 you do. Let me see. Amazon Linux extras install PL. Right. Yeah. Install. Yeah. Now let us see whether it's just. So I'm basically stressing the CPU, right? So same thing let me do on the second machine also. Right. Right. So here also we have installed stress. So let us run this. Right. So now here if you see, probably it would have might have already scaled, I think. Let us see. Right. So here if I go and check the instance monitoring, right, if you look at the CPU utilization, you will see that it is going to ramp up slowly, right, because we don't have the detailed monitoring, just the default monitoring we are using, so it will be a little slow to react, right. So we will go back and you will see whether it is adding more instances. All right, so here now if you go and check in auto scaling, right, let us go back here. Right, we just have to wait for a minute or two for this to happen. So let me check whether the CPU utilization is going up. Yes, it has gone to 100% over here. we just have to wait until it picks up that metric, right? So average CPU utilization has to be above 50%, right? So we'll just wait for that to kick in. So let us check whether it is scaling. Not yet. So here you see, now it is probably happening, right? So now here you see it has started scaling, right? So based on the CPU utilization, now it is increasing from 2 to 4. So you don't have to create any alarms when you're using target tracking policy. It automatically creates the alarms for you, right? Now here you see it has increased the desired capacity 4 and it has launched 2 instances. So here if you come back and check, right, the CPU utilization has shot up on both these instances, so the average is higher. So now if you go and see, it should have launched 2 more instances, right? It is launched 2 more instances and they will also be pushed behind the load balancer, right? Initially they will be out of service. Once they pass the health check, they will come into service, right? So whether it had to launch 1 instance or 2 instances, it is going to decide based on the average utilization. So it decided that CPU utilization is very high. I can only bring it back to approximately 50% if I add 2 more instances, because it cannot add more than 2, because the max is 4. It will not go more than that. So here, even though the stress is continuing, right, it is not going to add more than 4, because maximum is 4. It will never cross that. So now here you should not say that still the CPU is high, it is not launching more instances. Yes, it will not launch more because maximum it has reached, right? It has gone from 2 to 4 now. Okay. So whenever you are creating this target tracking policy, right, it would have automatically created these alarms for you, right? So you don't have to actually create alarms, but you can use your own metrics also. If you want, based on some alarm, you can do the scaling. For target tracking, based on the metric you specified, it is automatically going to create those alarms for you, right? It is automatically going to create the required alarms. Right here you see this target tracking, this automatically it will manage. This we didn't create, right? This was created automatically when you use a target tracking policy, and when you remove it, that CloudWatch alarm is also removed, right? Now, for example, you see it is still at 4, right? Because probably the CPU utilization still is high because my stress is still running, right? So now if I stop the stress utility, right, automatically the CPU usage is going to fall, right? Again, it will take a few minutes for it to detect that because we don't have detailed monitoring enabled, right? So now you will see the CPU utilization will fall. Again, after a few minutes, the average will be below 50 or something, right? So again, what it will do is it will remove the instances, right? It will remove the instances. So probably I will enable the detailed monitoring and maybe we'll see it faster with the application load balancer, right? Okay. Or if you want to wait, we can just wait. It will probably take a few more minutes for it to scale in, right? So while that is happening, what we will do is we'll just go to this automatic scaling, right? And then we will go to this, what you say, the scaling policies, right? So we saw what is the target tracking scaling policy. So you have, you can edit your target tracking policy if you want to. right? These you can edit. That is auto scaling configurations you can edit. If you don't want, you can remove it, or you can even add policies. You can remove this, you can add other policies, you can do combination, right? So the default is here target tracking. You can use step scaling or simple, right? Simple is like it is based on some CloudWatch alarm which you specify. It is a very simple way of doing. So you can say based on some CPU utilization. So you can create your own custom metrics, right, based on the traffic coming in, right? So you can do scaling based on the CloudWatch. For target tracking, the alarm is created automatically for you based on the metric that you choose. And you can say add some number of instances and then wait some number of seconds before allowing another scaling activity. So like this, you can add another policy to remove, right? So you can add, remove, or you can set it to a fixed number like that. This is simple scaling policy, usually not recommended to use, right? So now what they recommend is you can use like a step scaling policy, right? So step scaling policy is also similar to simple, but you can do it in steps, right? You can give it some scaling policy, like let us say CPU high, and I can choose a metric. Based on some metric, whenever it breaches this alarm, you add something like this, right? So here, because it is cost, it is showing me this different thing, but basically you can add, take some action. You can add, right? You can remove or set. You can add another step. You can say whenever the value becomes below something, right, then you add, you do something, right? So usually people use step or what do you say, or the uh, target tracking scaling policy, right? So step is you can add multiple steps for scaling, right? You have uh, a little more control based on some CloudWatch alarm. Target tracking is it's based on some 4, 4, 5 metrics that AWS has defined, and that CloudWatch alarm is created automatically for you, and it is going to scale based on that, right? So here probably in another 3 or 4 minutes it should bring down, because our utilization should have dropped by now, right? Yeah, so it has dropped. So this is just the average CPU utilization. So it's probably going to take a few more minutes, right? So if you have any questions, please let me know. We'll go with the application load balancer, right? Yeah, so here you have another concept, right, which probably I want you to find out, right? So when the scaling out is happening, that is when it is removing the instances, right? We saw what is scaling, scaling out is adding instances. When it is removing instances, scaling in, right? So say now it is going to scale in, right? In a few minutes it is going to scale in. So which instance is it going to remove, right? Scale in means it's going to remove some machine. Which machine is it going to remove? Any idea? Now we have 4 machines, right?
Like probably whichever is the old one, no, that one.
Yeah, so you just take a look at the documentation. It is called auto scaling termination policies, right? Auto scaling termination. I want you to take a look at this auto scaling termination policy. Basically, it tells you in which order it will terminate the machine, or which is given most preference, right? So here we have 4 instances. So the one labeled as 1 and 2 was created initially, right? And then these 2 machines were added. So what do you think will happen? It has to terminate. Which one will it terminate?
I mean, recently added, probably.
Okay.
The
Except
one,
this, the newly
the one
added.
it's all, the one which has already been added, the old one.
So the first condition which it looks, I'll tell you what is the first one, right? First it looks at which availability zone has more machines.
Yeah, that is first point. Yes.
First, it will look at which availability zone has more instances. Then it is going to check if you have any on-demand or spot, because we are using all on-demand, it does not matter, right? And then it is going to see whether your instances are using a older launch configuration, right? So there are 3 or 4 criteria, right? It doesn't have to be, I mean, the 4th or 5th criteria is what it says that, like you said, the oldest instance, right? It's not actually oldest, it is going to see which instance is closest to the next billing hour, right? So which instance is closest to the next billing hour, which is probably your oldest instance, right? So it bases on those type of things, right? So it is not just randomly going to go and remove some machine. It has some flow or some order in which it is going to look, some parameters it is going to look at. Most important is uh, the instances in which availability zones which have the most number of instances, or in most cases it is going to be what do you say, which instances are close to the next billing hour. So if you look at this, in this case, our first and second instance are older than these 2 machines. So probably they might be terminated, right? So you just take a look at this auto scaling termination policy. You can just read up a little bit about that.
Sid, one question. I mean, respect to this billing, like in Windows, I mean, if it is a Windows machine, I mean, stop and stop is considered as one billing, correct?
Yes, 1 hour.
I mean, terminate. So in this case, like even though it is managed by this, I mean, auto scaling, the same kind of billing is available, right?
Yes, yes, all that
Applicable.
is same. Auto scaling is just you are managing the count of instances.
Yeah.
That's all. Everything else
Okay.
is same.
When it terminates means it's counted as the same kind of billing
Yeah,
applicable.
yeah, all
Like,
that is same.
okay.
Right? Instead of manually clicking terminate, auto scaling is terminating. That's
Yeah.
all. That has
It's
nothing to
simply
do with billing. Auto scaling
okay.
is free. All other costs are the usual cost.
Yeah, it's a kind of automated process.
Yeah. So the instance
Okay.
launching, managing the count, and all that you are automating, but the billing is the same. In billing, you will not see any cost for auto scaling. Auto scaling is free. If you're using 4 instance, you pay for 4. The minutes, seconds, all that count is the same. There is no additional count. So again, it will scale in. It is just taking some time because our metrics are a little bit slow, right? So 50% probably I should have enabled the detailed monitoring. Now you see the value has fallen down. So probably now in a couple of minutes it should start scaling in. Probably we'll wait and see that here itself. Then we'll go to application load balancer, right? So while that is happening, I'll just quickly talk about application load balancer, right? Instead of wasting time, right? So application load balancer also, it is the same, right? How you configure all that same, but what is the architecture of application load balancer? You have target groups, right? Your instances are not straight away attached to the ELB, right? They are a part of a one or more target groups, right? Your instances. So here when you do auto scaling, right, you are managing a group of instances attached to a target group, right? Because here the instances are not just attached to the ALB, they're going to be a part of the target group. So what auto scaling is doing is it is scaling this group, because here you have groups. It is not like straightforward like your classic load balancer, right? Where you just have instances and auto scaling is scaling these instances. Whereas in application load balancer, auto scaling is going to scale the instances in the target group or the target groups that you specify. That's the only difference. Otherwise, the scaling policy, all those is the same, because here the targets are your instance. Whereas in classic load balancer, you don't have that concept, right? Your machines are directly attached to the ELB, so it is going to add or remove or maintain the capacity like this. Here also it is going to maintain, add or remove, but inside the target group that you specify. That is the main thing. Apart from that, everything else is the same, right? The scaling policies, all those are the same, right? So again here we just have to wait. Right, yeah, and you have another option which they have added a couple of months ago. So this probably will not come in the exam, but it is a new feature called instance refresh. Right, instance refresh is what is instance refreshes? You want to remove all these machines and you want to replace them with fresh machines. For some reason you want to do that. Right, you can do that. Say you have 100 machines, you want to replace them. All 100 you want to replace with fresh instances. Right, now they have an option called instance refresh. It is going to slowly replace. Yeah, it's not going to remove everything and add at once. Slowly, what do you say? Like blue-green type of a rolling deployment. It is going to. It allows you to trigger a rolling replacement of all previously launched instance with a new group of instances. If you want to, you can do an instance refresh. This will not come in the exam. It's a pretty new feature. Hardly 2 or 3 months ago, they have launched this, right? So instance refreshes to trigger a rolling replacement of the instances that are already launched in the auto scaling group. Right?
So that one question. I mean, in real time, like assume like in real time we have two set of machines, one for app server, another one for DB server. In this case, how it will automatically add this new machine? Mm.
Yeah. So I think in the beginning I told you, right? So this load balancer you can't use with DBs.
Sorry.
These load balancers you can't use with DB RTS databases. You can't use.
Okay, not in RDS. Like some case, inside the instance, I can install this. I mean, running my own database.
Yeah.
In
But your ELB application load balancer, they will not work with DB traffic. For that, you
okay.
have to use some SQL aware, what do you say, DB load balancers. It is not possible
Oh,
through your application load balancer or classic load balancer to route the DB traffic because it is not HTTP traffic, right? Database traffic is
yes,
not.
yes,
So
yes.
you cannot do that with DBs. It is for the web servers, application servers, those type of things, right? For DB servers, you have separate, what do you say? At present, AWS it doesn't have as such. For DB scaling, we saw, right? If you are using RDS, you use
RDS, yeah.
RDS also is not
Auto.
supported by ELB. Okay,
Okay.
RDS also you can't use with ELB. Okay,
Okay.
no database instance, whether it is RDS or you put your own database, it is not supported using this. For that, you have separate what do you say, third-party services. I'm not able to remember the name. Probably we can Google it, right? So
Okay.
you can say ELB with database. I think I'm not sure if I told you this because I usually say this, right? So RDS you can scale by itself, right, using the read replicas and multi-aging,
Yes, yes.
but you can't use it LB, right? So if you want to use something like database, where I'm not able to remember the name, it's at the right, yeah, HA proxy, right? So HA proxy is a very commonly used open source load balancer or a reverse proxy, right? A lot of people use this also. You can use it in AWS also, right?
Okay.
Or you have some specific thing like proxy SQL. All these are uh, database aware load balancers which support those type of traffic, right? So remember, you can't use your ELB, ALB with DBs. Either it is RTS or you put it on a EC2 instance, right? Yeah. So if you want to do some database level to improve the performance, like I told you, can use RDS if you want to use RDS, right? So these are what do you say, options that you have. RDS is because in a AWS exam they will ask you only with respect to AWS services, not some other third-party services, right? So RDS you can use to scale your databases using read replicas, Aurora replicas, multi-AZ, right? If you're using your own EC2 instance with DB, like I said, you can use third-party solutions like HA proxy as a database, sorry, as a load balancer in front of it, or you can use some caching layer, right? Like memcached or something in front of the DB, cache the reads, those type of things. Yeah, you can use memcache or the Redis, right? So these type of things you can put as a caching layer in front of the DB to improve the read performance, right? So do you guys use the memcache or something like that, or the Redis?
Yeah, Redis cache used long back.
Okay. Because we'll be seeing that topic, because I don't use that much, but it is there as a topic in here, right? So those type of things you can put for the database in front of a database if you want to cache, right?
Okay.
Again, it seems to be taking a little more time this time, right, for this to scale. But again, it should happen because the average was very high. We went to 100%, right? So for it to average out to less than 50%, it is taking more time, right? But it will happen, right? We just have to patiently wait for more time. So what we'll do instead, I'll just terminate this, right? We will create with the application load balancer, and probably there we'll try to see if it is happening faster, right? So I'm going to remove this auto scaling group, right? So when you remove this auto scaling group, it is going to remove your instances, not the load balancer, right? It is going to remove your instances, right? Not the load balancer, right? Already it has started, yeah, right? Already it has started terminating my instances, right? Once that is done, it is going to terminate my remove my auto scaling. So after practicing, always remember to remove the auto scaling group, yeah. So it has terminated the machines, and now it is removing the auto scaling group. Yeah, so now we will do with application load balancer. So here this load balancer will be there, so make sure you remove your load balancer also after you finish practicing. I'm going to delete this, right? So now let me create a application load balancer, right? So I'm saying A B C D E, right? So new security group accept traffic from port 80, okay, right? So we don't have a target group, I think. Yeah, we have a target group called TG1. So we will use that, right? So probably let me open the target group also. Already we have created this in the previous class. So this target group, all these things, they don't have any money, right? So this target group is going to have some instances, and it is going to have some health check, right? So we don't have any targets at the moment, right? Target group 1 we are using, right? Then the health check is already configured in the target group, right? So we are not going to add any instances to the target group. Okay, I'm just creating this application load balancer, right? So this application load balancer is going to be created, right? Now we'll go to auto scaling, right? So what I'll do is, let me remove this launch configuration. Or let me just say copy launch configuration. Let me go and see, and let me enable the detailed monitoring. So everything else is same. I'm just making sure, right? So you can't actually edit it. If you want, you can make a copy and create a new one, right? So here also security group, it has chosen, let us say create a new security group, and just add a new rule. So all right, let me just open all traffic from anywhere. Remove this one. Okay, for now we'll just open it for all traffic. Okay, key pair, all that is same, right? So let me create a new launch configuration, LC to copy, right? So our load balancer has been should have been created by now, right? It does not have any instances attached to it. So if I try to open it, I'll get a error, service unavailable, because there are no instances in the target group 1. So there is no instances to handle the traffic, right? So now we will go ahead and we will manage it with auto scaling group. Again, same steps, right? So I will just say auto scaling group for application load balancer. You can choose a launch template, a launch configuration we are using, right? Okay. So we will choose the launch configuration. Everything else is same, right? What are the subnets that you want to use, right? I can say only B and C and D, let us say B, C, D, right? My application load balancer is using B, C, D. Yeah, it is included. Okay, no problem. Right. So the next step, again, we want to use load balancing. Now here I want to use application load balancer, not classic. So here you specify the target group, right? The target group which you want to scale, right? So we want to scale the target group 1, and again everything else is same, right? You want to do the health check, right? And all that stuff, right? 120, skip that over here, right? Again, what is the desired capacity, right? Say let us start with 2 and do the similar thing, 2 to 4, right? Or say 2 to 5, something like this, right? And you can specify target tracking, or you can go back in and you can change to the step scaling policy. You can say average CPU utilization has to be more than this. Say I will put it slightly lower, 40. Okay, and then I'm going to say create it. Right. So when I say create auto scaling group, so here you see the desired capacity is 2, so it needs to update it to 2. So now here if you see, it should have launched 2 instances, right? It is launching instance in C and D, and automatically it will put it in the target group 1, right? Once the instance is launched, it is going to come into the target group 1, and target group 1 is configured to work with my load balancer. So you should be able to see this in a couple of minutes, right? So now it will say service unavailable. So we just wait for a minute for these to come up, right? So here you see it has added the instances into the target group. It is initial because it needs to pass the health check, right? Right? It is saying unhealthy. Why is it saying unhealthy health check failed? We'll just see. Why is it failing health check? Or was there some problem with my launch configuration? Let us see. If I open this, I should be able to see my application. Otherwise, some problem. Let's check the security group. All traffic is allowed. Load balancer security group. All traffic is allowed. I think some, yeah, it should, oh, it should be healthy, I think. Just check, refresh and check. Yeah, now it is healthy, right? It just took a few more seconds, right? So the instances are healthy, right? Now if I hit my application load balancer, my application should open, right? With two instances, okay? So it is working. Now same thing, now if I go and terminate an instance, it is going to replace it, right? So if I do some stress test, so probably we'll try to do that and see. Now we'll see, we'll wait and we'll wait for scaling it also. So let me log into this machines. Yeah, let me install stress. Probably I should have put this in the script itself. And let me do this stress CPU for timeout. Let me put something like 1600 or 1200 should be enough, right? So we'll just call this instance A. We will call this instance B. just keep an eye over here. Let us see. Still. Right. So let us go and run the stress. So now let us see whether it is going to scale up. So here if I take these two instances and just check the CPU. Alright, so here you see shorter intervals. So now any moment it should start scaling up. Okay, let's just wait for a minute or so and check. Yeah, so let's go here and just 80. Right now here you see the desired capacity has changed to 5 because my CPU utilization has gone very high on both the machines. So it thinks that now it needs 5 machines to manage that CPU capacity, right? The current is 2, minimum is 2, now the desired is 5. So it will try to now add 5, right? Add 5 means add 3 more. Now it should have added 3 more instances, right? So here you see it has added 3 more instances, right? It has added these 3 machines, right? A little faster because we enabled the detailed monitoring so that it's able to quickly pick up the metrics, right? Now again, if I stop the CPU utilization, right? So you can just try these things. It was just going to take a few minutes, right? Because this is a live class, so we just have to wait for this to show up, right? So now I have stopped the CPU utilization. So again, in another 3 to 4 minutes, you should be able to see that it is going to scale back in either to 2 or 3 machines so that it is able to maintain that uh, that level of CPU utilization on average across all your machines. Okay, so let me know if you have any questions now here so far, right? So we'll wait for this to happen. Meanwhile, we'll just start off with IAM, with identity and access management, right? So this scaling again should take a few more minutes, right? But should be much faster than the previous thing, right? So we will just wait for it. So currently we have 3 plus 2, 5 instances running. Just keep an eye on that, right? So now what we will talk about is identity and access management and security on AWS. So today we will start with security, right? And tomorrow we'll continue with security and identity and access management, right? So security on AWS, let us say. So the question here is, so what do you mean by security, right? So you guys probably already have some basic idea, right? Security means what, right?
It's a kind of road provision.
No, so basically security is there for different things, right? So if you're creating a EC2 instance, so we saw a lot of these things, right? So EC2 instance means you have the keys, you have the security group, access control. All these are what? To control security, either for the user
Yeah.
login or for the ports or for the networking, those type of things. Same thing in S3, you create buckets, who can access the bucket, all those things we are going
Yeah.
to see, right? So each service will have its own security features. There is no thing like security is common for everything, right? So each service depends on how you use, right? It will have its own security features and all that stuff. Okay, all that is okay. So the question here is, who is responsible for the security? So what is AWS? It is a public cloud platform,
Yes.
right? So who is responsible for security on AWS? That is the first question.
Okay.
Who is responsible? Any idea?
Yes. Something in some part we have some responsibility. Like for example, S3 bucket and all, it's entirely controlled by the user who is using.
Yeah, exactly. So when you talk about security on AWS, right? So AWS calls it, they use the term called the shared responsibility model. It is same for everywhere, but the technical or what AWS calls it is the shared responsibility model. So what is the shared responsibility model? What is the meaning of this is, right? Who is responsible for security? The customer and AWS. Both are responsible for security. So the customer is responsible for some parts, AWS is responsible for some parts. So AWS says it is responsible for security of the cloud, right? You are going to be, the customer is responsible for security or compliance in the cloud. This is what AWS is. So basically, whatever you put in the cloud, you are responsible for that security, right? So if you are creating a S3 bucket, like you said, if you are going to put some file in S3, you are going to, what do you say, manage the security for that. Whether you're doing encryption, all that is also security, right? Whether you're encrypting it at rest or to whom you're providing access, right? Whether you're maintaining the access logs, all that is your responsibility, right? So what do you mean by security of the cloud? So AWS itself, they are providing the infrastructure, right? Infrastructure is what? The data centers, right? The regions, availability zones, edge locations, all these AWS take care. You don't have access to these, right? So they are providing it as a service, right? But behind the scenes, they have equipment, hardware, data centers, physical security, all that stuff. All that AWS takes care. Apart from that, the services which they provide, that is EC2, that is the compute services, right? The storage services, all these also backend they have stuff, right? For you, EC2 means it's a virtual machine. You are creating EC2 is a virtual machine. But for this virtual machine to work, they should have physical hardware, physical networking, all that stuff, right? Those layers AWS takes care. Same thing for S3. S3 is you are creating your data, right? But where is your data actually stored? On some physical storage at the back end. So if somebody breaks into the data center and steals the storage, so those type of security they take care, right? So so the responsibility is both. You cannot blame AWS. So if you create a EC2 instance, you open all the ports and you have a unsecured what do you say, credentials, or your credentials leaked, somebody hacked your machine, you are responsible for that, not AWS. They are giving you mechanism to protect your instance. They are giving you security group, access control list, different things, keys, right? So at the virtual machine level, you are responsible. At the hardware level or at the service level, they are going to be responsible. So it is going to vary based on the service that they are providing, right? Because for S3, you don't have access to the instance. You just have access to the data that you store. So you have access only to the data. So you can control the data. Other things AWS takes care. If you take RDS, You don't control the instance, you just control the databases. The instance or the OS that AWS controls, you don't have access to that. You have access only to basic security group and what do you say, uh, who can log into the database, those type of things, right? You don't have access to the OS level. But if it is the EC2 instance, you have full access. You have access to the OS also. Inside the OS, you can do whatever you want. But whereas for RDS, you don't have access to the OS layer. Same thing for ELB. ELB, you don't have access to the actual, what do you say, ELB. It is a service, right? So you can do some basic configuration, those type of things, right? So it is going to vary depending upon the service that you are using, up to what layer you are uh, taking care of, responsible, right? So I have some, I mean, AWS itself, they provide a lot of material, right? So I'll just try to, instead of copying, let us see, right? I think I had some, yeah. So here you can go to AWS, right? The shared responsibility model. So all security related stuff, AWS has it over here, right? They have a separate documentation for security. So here is the diagram that they show you, right? So what are you responsible for? What is AWS going to be responsible for? So if we take this diagram, right? So you see this orange thing is going to be AWS responsibility, blue is going to be customer responsibility, and it is not always. So this division between orange and blue is not constant. It depends upon the service. Here it is just a high level, what do you say, overview, right? So AWS is responsible for security of the cloud. You are responsible for security in the cloud. So the hardware, the global infrastructure, right? The software on which AWS, right? So it is a service. Backend, they have hardware and software. So that these layers you never have access to. That is, the customer never has access to these things, right? Now these blue things, for certain services you have access to certain layers. For certain services you don't have. Right? If you take S3, you don't have access to this also, right? In S3 you can only store your data, for example, right? And you can control who can access that data, right? So it depends upon the service. Same thing for ELB. ELB, you don't have access to the operating system. You have access only to maybe the network. It's not even the, yeah, you can say it has a security group. So maybe you have access to the its basic firewall configuration, and you can't log into the ELB or do anything, right? It does not have any those type of permissions like a EC2 instance or a S3 bucket, right? So it depends upon the service. So this blue part might change, but this orange part, you will never have access, right? You never have access to the actual physical regions or the actual infrastructure or software which is required to run AWS, right? So this line, usually they draw a line here, and this line either goes up or it stops here. It doesn't go below this, right? So you are basically going to be responsible for what you put in the cloud or what you configure in the cloud, right? Okay, so which is what they are specifying, right? So the infrastructure, AWS, it takes care of both the hardware and the software which are required to run the AWS cloud, right? Beyond that, the services which we use, whether it is infrastructure as service or platform as service, whatever it is, those security we are responsible for, right? Like for example, if you are creating an instance, right, OS update, security patches, antivirus, right, firewall, security group roles, right, all that we are responsible for. Services like S3, right, you don't manage the infrastructure or the operating system or the platform. You just control access to your data, right? Encrypting, who can access them, those type of things. So it is going to depend upon the different services, right, that you use. So That is the basic, what do you say, the security model on AWS. It is called the shared responsibility model, security and compliance. Now next, coming to the compliance. So what is compliance? Right, again, all this comes in the security specialization exam, but just high level you need to know. Exam probably you might not get so much, right? So what is compliance? Basically, you have to be compliant to some standard, right? You might have come across this ISO, HIPAA, PCI DSS, right? So you must have come across at least PCI DSS because you are working in the banking thing, right? Right? So if you are processing some payments, right, your application, you're deploying an application which is processing payments, then there might be a requirement that it has to be PCI DSS compliant, or if it is a healthcare application, right, it might have to be HIPAA compliant, right? So it depends. There are global standards, country-wise standards, international standards, right? So there are a lot of these standards. You don't have to know what these certifications or standards are, but in case you want to deploy some application and it has to conform to some specification or certification or standard, right? It can be data privacy laws, right? It can be any of these things, right? So all these are, what do you say, compliance standards, frameworks, those type of things, right? So again, each country might have its own privacy laws, right? So all these things AWS provides information, right? All these are the compliance programs, are the, what do you say, standards specific to an industry, country, right? So if you are hosting some application which needs to conform to these standards, then you should know what those standards are. So it is not that you put something in AWS, it automatically becomes compliant. No, right? So AWS is saying it is possible that whatever you're hosting in AWS can be compliant to these standards. In order for it to be compliant to these standards, you have to do certain things. That is your responsibility, right? So for example, if you're taking HIPAA, so they will have some standards. They will say that all data has to be encrypted, right? So they will have like that a lot of standard, maintaining logs, how long you have to maintain logs, right? All those kind of things, right? So these are standards. This is nothing to do with AWS, right? So if you're more into security, right, you're hosting applications for which security is very critical, or it has to be compliant to certain standards, right? So they are providing documentation or the like a Excel checklist or something like that, right? So they are giving you some best practices. What do you say? How to architect, right, using multiple availability zones, right, based on what they think are the best practices, right? And again, you can modify those things also, right? You can modify those things also, but again, they have given what do you say, documentation, right, security controls, metrics, or what do you say, right, like I said, Excel sheet, right, which contains the stuff that you have to do, right, for enabling this, right? What are the regulations, right? Who is responsible for it, right? All that stuff they have given. You can use this as a template and make sure that you are following all these things, right? So they have a lot of such material available, right? For each what you say, each standard or whatever, right? So those things, again, it's mostly for security. You will not get it in the exam or probably even in the interview, but you should be aware that they have something like this, right? So AWS says they can be compliant to all these standards, right? They can be compliant to those standards, but in order to be compliant, you have to do that work, right? Whether it is GDPR, data privacy, country wise, right? So all that they provide, right? If you want some more information about some particular thing, you can contact AWS to get that information, right? So apart from that, here you have the different services which enable you to manage your security, right? So we are going to talk about identity and access management. We'll be talking about Cognito. We will see a little bit about directory services, organizations, right? High level. We'll talk about CloudTrail, right? AWS Shield, WAF. These are some of the high level services, high level we have to have an idea about, right? So all these are basically, what do you say, services which are, what do you say, which cater towards your security, identity, and compliance, right? So you have this information also. Sorry, let me close this, right? So you have all these are all standards. These are not AWS standards. These are just global or country-wise standards, right? These are the compliance programs, right? So we'll quickly go back and see whether I think our scaling has completed, right? So it was at 5 instances. Now if you see, it has terminated few instances, right? So now the desired capacity is 2. Currently there are 3. So now it is going to terminate another instance. So it has already terminated 2, I think. I heard 2 clicks, right? So it is terminating the third one. So it is just leaving 2 instances. So here if you see, it has terminated my instance A and B, right? Because they were the oldest running machines, right? My latest launched machines have not been terminated. The oldest machines have been terminated, right? So here you see it has scaled in. Also the desired capacity is 2, the current capacity is 2. So now it doesn't need to do anything. So it will maintain this capacity. So again, if the CPUs are going to go up, it is going to add capacity as required, right? Okay, so that is about auto scaling. Now we'll just talk about the security for a few more minutes too, right? So these are the compliance programs, right? So you are responsible to be compliant. So you should not assume that, because some people assume that you put something in AWS, automatically it is compliant, because all services might not be compliant to all standards, right? So in AWS you have many services, right? You have EC2, all these things. So all these services might not be compliant to all these standards, right? So you have to pick a particular standard and see whether the services which you are going to use support it in that region. For example, if you are using the, what do you say, criminal justice, you're deploying an application for Department of Defense or criminal justice, right? Or right, so they will say that you have to use only the US Gov Cloud. You can't put it in any other region, right? So we saw in one of the first classes, right? So which region are you going to use, right? So if it is some application like this, then I mean, this is some standard, right? Like CJS, then it dictates that you have to use the US Gov Cloud. You can't put it in any other region, right? And what is the security policy, right? All that they give you the checklist, some what do you say, some guidelines on how to create your VPC, all those things. In case you are having a VPN connection, what are the rules that you have to follow, right? All those things are defined for each compliance program, right? So that is going to be dependent on the compliance program, right? Another thing that you have to remember is this thing called penetration testing that might come in the exam. Penetration testing, right? So earlier, right, in case you know what is penetration testing, right? So, right, earlier it was not possible for you to do this, right? You had to take permission from AWS to do penetration testing. If you are hosting something in AWS, and maybe your security team wants to do penetration
Cyber security
testing,
latest.
right? So you cannot do it. You could not do it earlier, right? You had to take permission from AWS. But now they are saying that you can do certain things without permission. Certain things you have to take permission, certain things are not allowed. Right? Here's their policy on penetration testing. Right? You can do penetration testing on these services. You are not allowed to do these type of activities. If they catch you doing it, they will stop your AWS account. Right? So again, for these things, for certain things, they have the guidelines, right? So you want to do some stress testing for the network, you want to do some DDoS testing. So they have provided the guidelines for those things. You don't simply go and start doing these types of tests because they might block your account. So you means I mean the security team or whatever whoever is responsible for doing this, they need to be aware of these things, right? What they are allowed to do, on what service they are allowed to do, what they are not allowed to do, for what they are supposed to take permission from AWS to do, right? So all that is documented over here, right? So if you want to do a DDoS simulation test, they have the policy for that, what you're allowed to do, right? Those type of things. And if they catch you doing any of these things on other AWS accounts, right, you can do it on your accounts. Certain things, right? You do it on other people's AWS servers or whatever. Again, it might be a flag, right? So that's what they're saying, right? So you can do within your infrastructure. Usually, you're not allowed to do port scanning, those type of things on other people's AWS infrastructure. Okay, that is probably one more thing you want to keep in mind. Why is my yeah. Yeah. So here you have the DDoS testing, right? So if you want to do this, right? So they have some conditions for this, right? So you don't need to know what are the conditions, but you have to know that you need to get permission from AWS, and this is what you're allowed to do. This is what you're not allowed to do. Earlier, for penetration testing, also it was not possible without prior permission, right? So for other types of events, you submit a form to AWS and you get approval. Anything apart from these things you want to do, right? So they have rules and regulations for those type of things also, right? So you can do against AWS infrastructure without prior approval for 8 services which are listed. Earlier, even this was not possible, right? So remember, it is against your own AWS infrastructure, not against somebody else's AWS infrastructure. That is also there, right? So this is probably another thing you want to just remember at a high level, right? What is this penetration testing? What is the process if you want to do this? Just remember, for these services you can do, the other type services you cannot do without getting permission, right? And these type of things, port flooding, spoofing, scanning, right? Request flooding, right? These type of things not allowed unless you get permission for certain things, right? So this is one more thing about security, right? So tomorrow we will talk more about this. What do you say? This shared responsibility model, right? And then we'll go into the general security on AWS, which we don't take care. What AWS takes care, right? Just high level, you need to know some 2 or 3 topics, right? And then we will go into the main thing called identity and access management, right? So identity access management also, it does not come in the exam much, but practically it is useful, right? So exam also you should know just the terms and all that, but creating the policies and all that, that is more of practical stuff. Okay, so in tomorrow's class we'll continue with these 3 topics. Okay, so I'm going to remove my auto scaling group. Just let me know if you have any questions.
No.
Yeah, so we'll catch up tomorrow then.
Yeah,
Sure. Yeah.
sure.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you.